I had no idea that that simple visit would be the beginning of events capable of upending everything I thought I knew. That morning, my husband Luca had insistently asked me to accompany him, together with his father Antonio, to visit a new office complex where they had just concluded an important deal. I wanted to indulge him, also because I wanted to spend time with him, away from the usual daily tasks. That day, however, would awaken emotions in me that I never imagined I would feel. We arrived in the early afternoon. Sunlight reflected off the glass of tall, modern buildings, creating blinding glare. Luca left us at the reception to talk to one of the managers, reassuring me with a smile. "Just a few minutes, darling." I remained alone with Antonio, exchanging a look that betrayed a slight uncertainty. I had never been too close to him, not in the classic sense. He was a charming man, with that confident air that only a certain maturity can give. But the idea that there could be something more between us had never crossed my mind. Not until that day. We got into the elevator while Luca lingered talking. The elevator was spacious, yet the walls felt like they were squeezing us in. Antonio pressed the button for the 5th floor and, as usual, started telling me about the new deal. I tried to listen to him, but a strange energy moved in the air, a subtle tension, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The elevator began to rise and suddenly stopped with a jolt. The lights went out for an instant, leaving us surrounded by an eerie shadow. "What the hell?" Antonio muttered, pressing the buttons uselessly. I turned to him, feeling my heart speed up. "We're still," I said in a small voice. I had never been claustrophobic, but the situation made me uncomfortable. I tried calling Luca, but there was no signal. Antonio did the same, with the same result. "Don't worry," he said, trying to reassure me. His tone was calm, confident, but I noticed something different in his eyes, a spark I had never seen before. Time passed, and no one seemed to notice us. I felt the agitation growing. "I didn't think such a modern building would have problems with the elevator," I said, trying to break the silence with a nervous smile. Antonio looked at me with a slight mischievous smile. "Unexpected situations, huh?" he murmured. His voice seemed warmer, more intimate. I felt uncomfortable for a moment, but it wasn't an unpleasant discomfort. It was different. He began to speak again, but this time his tone had changed. His jokes were lighter, almost provocative. "We're really trapped, huh?" he laughed, and the sound of his laughter, low and deep, seemed to resonate in the confined space. I felt the heat growing, but it wasn't just from the stagnant air. There was something else moving between us. I tried to chase away those thoughts, to distract myself, but every time I looked up, Antonio was closer than I expected. Maybe it was just the narrow elevator, or maybe not. "You and Luca are a nice couple," he said suddenly, changing the subject with surprising ease. "He's lucky to have you." His words made me blush, but not for the reason I wanted. There was something in his tone, a subtext that I couldn't ignore. "Thank you," I replied, my voice lower than usual. I tried to keep the conversation light, but I felt that thrill growing inside me. After all, Antonio was charming, very. And in that moment, stuck together, there was a confidence we had never shared before. Every minute seemed to expand, turning into an eternity. Antonio leaned against the wall, and I followed him with my gaze. His calm was disarming, but there was also a subtle tension that attracted me. "We're really stuck, huh?" I said again, more to fill the silence than anything else. "It could be worse," he murmured with a half-smile. "At least we're in good company." I laughed nervously, but my heart was pounding. I was trying to understand what I was feeling. Maybe it was just the anxiety of the situation, being stuck in a small space. Or maybe it was something else. But that electric tension between us, the one I felt growing, was undeniable. The silence in the elevator became palpable. Every noise seemed amplified, even the sound of our breathing. I tried not to think about it, but it was difficult to ignore Antonio's closeness. I could feel the heat from his body radiating towards me, even though we weren't touching. I turned to the elevator control panel, pressing the buttons again in the hope of a response. Nothing. The elevator remained motionless, as if we were suspended in space. "That's a real problem," I muttered, trying not to let my growing agitation show. Antonio laughed lightly, a low, deep sound that seemed to fill the small space. "Don't be so worried," she said, moving ever so slightly closer. "They'll get us out soon." But it wasn't just worry I felt. It was a mixture of emotions. The anxiety of being blocked, sure, but also a growing awareness of him. The situation became more and more unusual. Under other circumstances, I would have tried to ignore that feeling, but here, stuck in the same space, there seemed to be no escape, not only from the elevator, but also from what was developing between us. Have you ever experienced a moment when the attraction was irresistible? Write it in the comments. "Luca might be worried," I murmured, more to convince myself than out of real concern. My words rang hollow. Of course, I was anxious about Luca, but at that moment my thoughts were elsewhere. They were focused on Antonio, in that elevator that seemed to shrink around us. He looked at me, and in that moment our eyes met in a completely different way than usual. Usually, our meetings were formal, cordial, as expected between daughter-in-law and father-in-law. But now, there was something else in his eyes, something deeper, almost unfathomable. "Luca is strong," he said calmly. "He'll know we're okay." The way he said it, with that disarming confidence, made me feel protected, but at the same time it triggered a confusion in me that I couldn't define. I couldn't deny the growing attraction I felt. I felt like I was on the edge of a precipice, and every word he said pushed me a little closer to the edge. The air in the elevator seemed to get heavier and heavier. Or maybe it was me who perceived every breath, every movement with greater intensity. Antonio moved slightly, closing the distance between us. It wasn't an abrupt gesture, but enough to make the atmosphere even more charged. "You've never been stuck in an elevator before, have you?" he asked, trying to ease the tension. "No, never," I replied with a nervous smile. I tried to joke, but I knew the tone of our conversation had changed. It wasn't just being stuck. There was something else, something unsaid, but clearly perceptible. The minutes passed, and the tension grew inexorably. Antonio began to tell me anecdotes about his life, about his past adventures. I found myself laughing at his stories, as if trying to distract myself from what was happening inside me. But every laugh seemed to break against that strange attraction that continued to grow, like a magnet that brought us closer without us being able to do anything about it. "I don't think you realize how special you are," he said suddenly, in a deep voice that seemed to resonate directly within me. I remained silent. For a few moments I couldn't find the words. The already tense air became further saturated, binding us with growing tension. "Antonio, I started, trying to stop that thought before it took shape, but he interrupted me, as if he knew exactly what I was about to say. "I know I shouldn't say that," he continued, his voice now closer, as if he were inches away from me. "But it's the truth. Luca is lucky to have you. I wish I had a woman like you in my life." I felt my heart skip a beat. There was a part of me that wanted to reject those words, But another part, a deeper one, couldn't deny that a spark had been lit. His words resonated in my mind, fueling a desire that I had tried to stifle, but which was now there, tangible. The space between us seemed non-existent. I felt like every breath I took was tied to his. Every movement seemed to lead to an inevitable collision. "You shouldn't say those things," I whispered, but my tone was weak, more a plea for self-discipline than real resistance. He took a step forward, enough for our shoulders to touch. The contact sent a shock through my entire body. I knew we were crossing an invisible line, one we shouldn't have crossed. "I'm just being honest," he said, in a low voice, looking at me intently. "There is something between us, and you know it too." His words overwhelmed me. I was about to respond, to say something that might stop everything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, as if each beat was a warning, but every fiber in my body seemed to ignore it. Antonio was so close that his breath mixed with mine, and the electricity between us was undeniable. His words echoed in my mind. "There's something between us, and you know it too." He was right, and that made everything even more dangerous. I tried to look away, to remember Luca, my husband, our life together. But every thought that tried to anchor me to reality was drowned out by the intensity of the moment. Antonio remained motionless. His eyes were fixed on me, as if he was waiting for me to take the initiative. The tension in the air was unbearable. My hands trembled slightly as I moved a strand of hair behind my ear, a nervous gesture that didn't escape his attentive gaze. There was no precise moment, no signal that pushed us over the edge. It was as if our wills were broken. He took a step forward, closing the distance between us to nothing. Before I could think too much about it, I found myself wrapped in his arms, his eyes searching mine with such intensity that it took my breath away. There was no longer any rational thought, no doubts, only the burning desire that could no longer be ignored. Our first kiss was overwhelming. Our lips met with an intensity that seemed to have been built up for some time, a long suppressed passion finally breaking free. I knew this was wrong. Every part of me was screaming to stop, but my body seemed to act independently of my mind. Antonio's hands wrapped around me firmly, pulling me towards him as his body moved closer to mine. The elevator, that small space that seemed to close in around us, became our refuge in that moment of pure passion. It was like falling into an abyss, without the desire to climb back out. Antonio was in front of me, and in that moment, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. His kisses became more intense, deeper, as if we were making up for years of unspoken emotions. My hands gripped his shirt, pulling him even closer as the heat of his body melded with mine. I lost myself in him, in his smell, in the way he made me feel alive like never before. His hands began to travel across my body with a combination of gentleness and force, each touch lighting a fire within me. We moved slightly to the corner of the elevator as his lips slid along my neck. I tried to hold back a moan, but my skin felt like it was burning under his touch. I felt divided. On the one hand, the awareness of the betrayal I was committing. On the other, an irrepressible need to continue. Antonio delicately tangled his fingers in my hair, pulling me back just enough to stare into my eyes. "We don't have to do this," he whispered, but his words sounded hollow, almost like a feeble resistance against the inevitable. I didn't answer. Instead, I moved closer to him, kissing him again, this time with a determination that left no room for doubt. My mind had now lost control. The body acted on its own. My hand slid down his chest, feeling the tense muscles beneath his shirt. He responded by grabbing my waist, lifting me slightly against the elevator wall. Have you ever found yourself caught between what's right and what you crave? What would you have done in his place? Tell us in the comments. Everything that belonged to the outside world, my husband, my daily life, seemed to dissolve in that instant. It was just me and Antonio, united by something forbidden, but so irresistible. A slight buzz made us jump. The elevator trembled slightly, as if it were finally working again. But we were now too far away to stop. Our lips parted for just a moment, heavy breaths filling the air saturated with desire. "They're going to get us out," I muttered with a knowing smile, with no intention of stopping what we'd started. Antonio looked at me with an intensity I had never seen before. "We still have a few minutes," he replied with a half-smile, as his hands continued to explore me with exasperating slowness. The sound of the elevator starting to move again warned us that time was running out. Antonio stared at me for a long time, our bodies still glued together, the heat of our skin alive like a flame. We slowly separated, our gazes full of that secret we now shared. "I won't say anything," I whispered, almost like a promise. "Me neither," he replied, with one last light kiss on the lips. The elevator opened with a clang, revealing the real world, a world made of marriages, responsibilities, and boundaries. But inside me I knew that something had changed. I had crossed a threshold and came out with a secret that would bind Antonio and me forever. The cold air of the corridor hit me like a slap as we left. Antonio and I walked in silence, distant, as if nothing had happened. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I tried to appear calm, to hide the restlessness that was growing inside me. Luca was there, waiting for us, with the phone in his hand. "Finally." "I was about to let someone know," he said, visibly relieved. He came up to me and kissed me lightly on the cheek. Guilt washed over me like a sudden wave. I took a step back, trying to hide my confusion. "A technical problem," I replied in a hesitant voice, avoiding meeting Antonio's gaze, who remained a few steps behind. "But we managed to get by." "Good thing you weren't stuck for too long," Luca replied, unaware of everything. "I'm going to get the car. See you at the parking lot." She nodded, watching him go. When he disappeared from my sight, I slowly turned to Antonio. He looked at me with an indecipherable expression, as if he was trying to understand what was happening inside me. Our secret was now palpable, like a weight weighing on both of us. "We'll forget it, right?" I muttered, more of a hope than a statement. Antonio approached, his gaze serious. "I don't know if we can ever do it," he said softly, "but no one will ever know. It's between the two of us." Those words, although reassuring, made me understand that something had now irreversibly changed. I would never have been able to look at Antonio with the same eyes. Every time our eyes would have met, that forbidden memory would have come back to the surface, binding us inextricably, in secret. The following days passed in apparent normality. Luca continued to be the affectionate husband he always was, while Antonio and I crossed paths during the usual family meetings, maintaining a measured distance. However, just one glance was enough to feel that invisible thread of our secret tightening, intertwining us in a shared silence. I often wondered if Luca might suspect something. Was it really possible that he didn't have the slightest doubt about what had happened between me and his father? He seemed to trust me blindly, but every hug or kiss amplified the weight of my guilt. I hadn't just betrayed him, but also the person I thought I was. I was aware that that secret would continue to weigh on me, No one would ever find out, but deep down I knew that betrayal would leave an indelible mark. Not because Luca was different, but because I had changed. One evening, while Luca kissed me sweetly before going to bed, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman reflected in it. The devoted wife I had always thought I was no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had succumbed to temptation, carrying a secret that could not be ignored. But how could I confess everything to my husband? How could I destroy everything for a moment of weakness? I knew that, even if I would never reveal that secret to anyone, I would have to learn to live with this new awareness of myself. The elevator, that place where we were trapped, had transformed into my internal prison, and no matter how much I wanted to escape, that secret would stay with me forever. If you want to receive new videos of the series, write, "I want the sequel," in the comments. If you liked the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive a preview of future publications. Thank you.